Jacob's sister fell suddenly. She was unconscious. Jacob screamed for his parents. "Mom, Dad, it's Alana. Something is wrong with her. Come quickly." Father came running and Mother followed. "Alana, honey, talk to me." Father tried to wake her up. He scooped her up and ran to the front porch. Mother hurried and brought some water. They asked Jacob what had happened. Jacob said that she just fell suddenly while they were playing. She was not responsive even after spraying some water on her face. The two parents were helpless. They did not want to waste any time. "Let's take her to the hospital, honey," Jacob's mother told her husband, tears running down her cheek. Father grabbed her and ran to their old car. Mother got in and took Alana into her hands. Jacob got into the front passenger seat. Father started the engine and drove them to the hospital as fast as he could. As quickly as he was, it took over an hour for them to get to the hospital, given that their farm was 50 miles away from the city. Jacob's mother tried to wake Alana up the whole ride, but with no luck. Jacob was petrified. His little heart was filled with dread. As his parents stopped the car and ran to the hospital entrance, Jacob watched them, frozen, in the car seat. He felt like the whole world was getting dimmed. After the nurse took his sister to the trolley, the mother followed them. Father came back and took the vehicle to the parking lot. Then Father reassured him that his little sister was going to be okay. But the tears falling from his eyes could not reassure Jacob. Then they quickly went to the ICU, where Alana was taken. Mother was crying at the entrance. The doctor came out just as Jacob and Father, arrived there. He looked at them, and Jacob knew even before the doctor shook his head. They hugged each other and cried. Jacob felt like his whole world was falling apart. At the funeral, Jacob did not move from his sister's side. He prayed and prayed to God, asking him to heal her. "Dear God, please make her alive again." He promised to God that he would never quarrel with her again and that he would never make her cry ever. But God did not seem to believe him. It was unbearable to see the burial as he watched his little sister bury part of his heart that day. Time heals many wounds, but Jacob was constantly reminded of the emptiness in his heart where Alana resided whenever he saw other kids play, quarrel, or just talk with their siblings. One day, he learned that one of his friends at school, Tim, also had a little sister, Tina, who was just 3 years old. He was thrilled. He just wanted a sister. It didn't matter if she was not living with them. He figured that Tim's sister could be his sister as well. After that day, Jacob got closer to Tim as a friend. Tim also started to like Jacob as a friend once he learned that the silent boy was a good person. Tim's father was also a farmer, and Jacob's father knew him. Their farm was a few miles away from Jacob's farm. They knew well what Jacob's family had gone through and understood that it hit the little boy especially. They were happy that Jacob had made good friends with their son. Both families saw it as a start for Jacob to move on from his loss. Jacob always tried to visit Tim's house to spend time with Tim and Tina. Jacob loved her like his own sister. He would ride his bike to Tim's house on weekends. Tina also loved him back the same way she loved her brother. As time passed, Tina could fill the empty space in Jacob's heart left behind by Alana. Now Jacob and Tim were in middle school. One day Tim was asked to go to the office during a class. He was asked to bring his things as well. Jacob felt uneasy about it. Usually, it is not good news if they send you home in the middle of the day. When the teacher returned, she looked unfortunate, but she did not say anything. Jacob could not focus on the lessons for the rest of the day. When the school bell rang, he went to the teacher and asked her why Tim was sent home. The teacher knew Tim was his best friend. She told him he had received some bad news from home. She did not tell him what the bad news was. Jacob remembered that Tim's grandmother was quite old. Now he suspected that she might have passed away. He felt sad to think that because he liked Tim's grandmother. She was a kind woman. Just as Jacob turned to go to the school bus, he found his parents coming. His mother came and hugged him. Jacob asked her if Tim's grandmother had passed away. She looked at her husband sadly. Then she told him that Tina had been in an accident. She told him a drunk driver had crashed through the school fence at recess. Tina had been playing with some friends near the fence. 3 girls were hit, and Tina passed away from the injuries. "No, no, no, no!" Jacob screamed so loud with extreme sadness and anger. Then he ran away. He went to a corner of the playground and started crying hard. His father followed him and hugged him while he cried hard. The parents were devastated. They did not know how to console their son this time. They hoped that time would heal him again. At Tina's funeral, Jacob prayed again. However, he knew that Tina was not coming back. He even asked God to take years away from his life to give them to Tina. But he knew that was the last day he would see her. At the burial, all that happened was Alana came to him as a flashback, and he broke down crying. Many at the funeral knew of his past and that Tina was like a sister to him. Everyone shed tears that day. They could feel the grief of Tina's family, but it was the grief that Jacob went through that hit them the most. Jacob fell into depression. With great effort and support from counselors, he came out of depression. It took several months for him to recover fully, but he was not even close to the same Jacob who was before Tina's passing away. He became more distant from everyone, including Sam. He tried to talk with Sam several times after Tina passed away, but Sam did not encourage him, and it seemed he was avoiding Jacob. Finally, Jacob understood that Sam reminded him too much of Tina. It was his way of coping, and Jacob was okay with it. It seemed that Tina was the only thing holding the two friends together. Now that she was gone, their friendship was not sustainable. However, Jacob went through middle and high school, showing great promise. Like many of his schoolmates, he wasn't even interested in having a girlfriend. While other guys were interested in getting a girlfriend, he completely ignored all kinds of relationships and focused entirely on his education. He was doing very well in exams. He was always the best in the class. Maybe it was a way of coping with the mental pain. However, his parents were happy that he was doing well. Jacob decided that he wanted to become a doctor. He just wanted to save lives and stop the heartache. He would be able to help other people by not letting them experience losing a loved one. Jacob became a doctor after years of extensive training and countless written and practical tests. He completed his residency successfully. Everyone thought he was a little numb to the pain and suffering you see at the hospital. Maybe he was, but most probably it was because he had learned to cope with his feelings better from what he had gone through while he was a kid. Soon he was hired by one of the best hospitals in the country. He assisted the chief surgeon for several months before being put on duty alone as the primary surgeon. The first day he was in charge of theater as a qualified surgeon in the city hospital, he was a little nervous. It was Christmas, and most doctors were on leave. So he was the one with life and death in his hand. Just as he put on his coat, a girl was brought into the ER with multiple injuries after she was hit by a car. Jacob took the case and he examined her. Her heart rate was meager. No one thought she could be saved after seeing the severity of her injuries, but the only thing he saw when he looked at her was that she looked exactly like Tina. He closed his eyes briefly and then looked at her face again. She was still precisely like Tina. "Is there anything wrong, doctor?" a nurse asked since he was frozen for a few seconds. "No, everything's fine. Let's save her. We will save her," he said, determined to save her. The nurse was surprised because no doctor usually talked with that much certainty. It was because they did not want to jinx it before they did it. Jacob did several surgeries on her, which took over 8 hours to complete. It was exhausting. Sometimes he almost gave up, but looking at her face gave him the courage to continue. At the end of it, the little girl was stable and on her path to recovery. No one thought it was possible. All the nurses were happy and surprised at how good their new doctor was. They all congratulated him on the success of the surgery. After checking all her vitals, he went to get some rest. In a few hours, he came to ICU to check on her, and he was surprised to see Tim and his wife. As soon as Tim saw him, he hugged Jacob and told him they were forever grateful to him for saving their daughter. Then Jacob told him the most fantastic thing. Tim, I saw in your daughter our little sister, Tina. She and also my sister, Alana, were the ones who kept me going through that surgery when even I doubted myself sometimes. Jacob's words moved Tim. He said, I am so sorry for pushing you away after Tina passed away. Jacob, it's just that you reminded me of her too much. I should have been with you, though. I know it must have hurt you the same way as it did to me when Tina passed away, maybe even more. Because I know that you got your sister back through Tina. I can't even imagine what it was like to lose her twice. I am sorry, Jacob. Tim had tears running down his face. Jacob put his hands on Tim's shoulders. Don't even think of it, Jacob. I understood why you were like that at that time. I could understand your pain. That's why I did not bother you much after that. But I am forever grateful to your family for letting me into your lives and giving me the chance to have a sister again. That was beyond anything I could dream of. In a way, God answered my prayers to give Alana back by sending me to Tina and your family. And today, God has given me a chance to save Tina as well. I am grateful for that. Now both Alana and Tina live in my heart forever.
Life is full of mystery. The more you try to unfold it, the more you continue to realize there is more to it. Everything seems normal in this popular hotel in the city. People are coming in from every part of the world, as tonight is the night for the popular gala night. The hotel has been repainted purposely for this event. The color of the hall looks radiant as every staff seems to be working hard to ensure the event turns out to be better than the previous year. While everyone was busy getting prepared, a voice caught a young man's attention. It was an older woman. "Excuse me, young man, can you help me cross to the other side?" she asked politely. The young man, who looked like someone at the event of losing an appointment or a dinner, reluctantly agreed to help her without asking further questions, as he forced a smile on his face. "Day could not get any better," he said silently as he helped the older woman and walked away pretty fast as they got to the other side of the road leading to the famous hotel. The woman gave a relieved sigh. "At last," she said as she approached the door of the hotel with her crutches. An old woman who should be in her 80s was limping with her crutches, trying to get into the hotel. Judging by her mode of dressing and her look, what could she be looking for? She seemed to be a beggar or someone from a low-life family. This was the dialogue that transpired between two security officers who were on duty. "Sorry, ma'am, but you can't go in," they said as she approached them. The older woman's countenance changed as she pleaded with the security officers to let her in. Unmoved by her words, they brushed her aside in a bid to let in their customers. The older woman could not hide her emotions anymore. Tears gathered around her eyes. "I own this place," she quickly comments. The officers asked what she had just said, and she repeated herself. Security stares at her from head to toe scornfully, and one of them asks, "Ma'am, would you kindly leave here before I call the cops?" She cried out that she owned the hotel this time. She was very loud that she attracted the attention towards her directly. People started to stop by and ask why the security officers are harassing an old woman on crutches. While some of the guests condemned the officers' cold attitude towards the older woman, some praised them for doing their work diligently, as any beggar shouldn't be allowed into the same hotel where highly respectable personalities exist. I would rate this hotel 0 star and tell them how bad the hotel has become if this dejected woman is allowed here, an unknown voice amid the gathered crowd roared. He probably looks like a business person of high profile. As it is known, that nothing flies as fast as wrong information. It flies faster than a rocket, making the situation noticeable to the hotel's owner. To appeal to the people about the problem, he comes out. He comes out only to find his grandmother at the center of the situation. He rushed towards her and gave her a big hug. Everyone was astonished, and there was total silence. It was as if a minute silence was being observed for a loved one who had just departed. The security officers were as confused as the guests. Why is the CEO all out and embarrassing himself? Hugging that old wag is the height of it. The expression on the people's faces said it all. The CEO manages the situation by introducing his grandmother to all and orders that the security officers escort his grandma into the hotel for the gala night. She smiles as she approached the door of the office. A lot has changed here, and I can see you are doing well to keep our family's legacy after all these years. I'm super proud of you, Tony. Tony, the CEO, smiles with a questioning face as he offers his grandmother a glass of water. Come on, son. I know that look. I might be struggling health-wise, but you should know I will never miss the gala night again this year. It could be my last, you know, she said with worries on her face. But Tony moved closer to her to reassure her that she would not die anytime soon with a warm hug. Tony asked why she had to board a plane alone, risking her health. She told him she was trying to do anything that makes her happy, as happiness increases her lifespan, and to retake a glance at the hotel. They both have a good laugh. Grandma, I'm not impressed with what happened earlier. I should make some clarifications. Tony requested she stay in the hotel, as there were first-hand situations that he needed to address in front of their VIPs at the event. She said that was fine. She dipped her hands inside her bag to take her med. I shall wait here for you, son. Tony leaves for the office, but not after instructing the security officers to ensure his grandmother is fine and attend to her need. The older woman's eyes traveled around the room as she was impressed with Tony's development around the hotel. She was pleased with everything her eyes caught, and she knew even Tony's late father, who happens to be her son, would be proud of him. Tony returns to check on his grandma to be sure she's okay. He slightly opens the door and finds his grandma smiling. He chuckled and closed the door behind him. Tony knows the central question will be about the older woman he welcomed outside earlier. He is ready to face it and answer any questions in that direction. He climbs upstage to open the gala night, as it is the hotel's custom. As he approaches the podium, a loud voice throws a question he has been expecting. Mr. Tony, who was that beggar you hugged outside? He smiled and requested that the guest remain calm as he explained everything. He gives his opening speech and welcomes everyone who has honored their invitation. When he was done, he decided to talk about the older woman many had met earlier. So, many who care to know, that was my grandmother, and she is the owner of this hotel. The revelation caught so many by surprise that there was an indistinct murmuring in the hall. Mr. Tony decided it was time to let his grandma give her speech. He invites her especially to the podium in front of the special guests. As she approached the stage slowly with her crutches, she smiled brightly and stood in front. She could not help it as her emotions got the better of her. The number of the crowd moves her. Most people in the event become silent, waiting patiently to hear from the older woman herself. She begins her story after wiping up the tears. I am Mrs. Williams, the owner of this beautiful hotel, which is managed and well supervised by my grandson. Everything in life comes with a price, and we have to face whatever life throws at us, she says, still maintaining her smiling face. I am very ambitious, and I always try to beat my husband's success because I strongly believe women can also be seen as equal to men. I think so much about equality. My orientation got the better of me as I slowly began to drift away from my family. I built this hotel and many other companies around the state, forgetting I am needed as a mother to my son and a wife to my husband. Because of my target, I decided not to give birth to another child. At first, my husband strongly opposed it, but he eventually came to terms with me because he is very understanding. Tony's father, who was my son then, hated me so much for the lack of attention and love. This is something I have grown to regret every day. He grew up well through my husband's help and the maid he preferred calling his mother. I didn't seem to care. That was the least of my worries, as I was too occupied with the work that I failed to realize my husband was battling a terminal disease. He kept it away from me to ensure I focused on my ambitions. I could not have been able to save his life, but I could have been there for him when he needed me. At this point, she was getting very curious. Tony immediately recognized the symptoms as her mental illness beginning to swing into action. He rushed towards her, calmed her down, and decided she had had enough for the night. The audience was silent as everyone was touched by her story. They pondered in their minds as they had many questions that needed answers. Did the terminal disease eventually kill her husband? What happened to her son? Mrs. Williams begged Tony to let her continue the story, as that would free her from the heavy burden within her. Tony seemed reluctant, but could not do much as the older woman looked determined. "All right, but you also don't have to do this." She looked at him, patting his back, and made her way to the podium. As she tries to mount the podium, the curious audience starts clapping and is all ready to hear her story to the very last. I was in my office when I was called by the family doctor, who broke the news of my husband being in a coma to me. On getting there, he explained the situation of things to me, which sounded like a lie to me. "My husband looks healthy," I said to myself. She became emotional again. She recounts terrible. She cleans up her face and continues. Only then did I realize I had not seen him in a while. I rushed towards the ward and saw him on life support. My ambition ruled me, but I still loved my husband. And after months of looking after him in the hospital, and spending nights with him right beside him, he passed away. My son accused me of being the reason for his death and vowed never to have anything to do with me. Months later, everything seemed odd due to the end of my husband, who was the source of my wisdom and achievement. On the other hand, my son graduated as a business management first-class student, began to do drugs, smoke, drink, and even be accused of being a rapist. He attempted to rape a young lady at that time. His condition worsened when he became an addict. I tried to talk him out of it and be there for him, but he never saw me as his mother. He was in rehab when I learned he had impregnated a lady. I took the young teen in and began to care for her, and she gave birth to my Tony. My son's condition at the rehab grew from worse to worse, as there was no improvement at all. He started falling ill at the rally again. We later discovered that he had been smuggling drugs with the help of a guard. His lungs gradually began to fail. The drug damaged his kidneys. He was released to come home after I pleaded for his release for better treatment. On his arrival home, he was furious about the baby and vowed to deal with the mother. I went out with my grandson, to whom I had promised to dedicate all my time, only to get a call that the house was on fire. The investigation later had it that the fire broke out after my son tried lighting his cigarette in the kitchen after trying to calm his nerves. The maid who was at the home at the time, Tony's mother, and my son all died in the fire outbreak, leaving just my grandson and me against the world. The shock resulted in depression for me and led to my current health condition. The audience feels so sorry about what the older woman had to endure. Her story seems to be a very tragic. They also pitied Tony, who had never had the opportunity to see his parent. The older woman moves close, hugs him tight, and apologizes for taking his life from him. At this point, Tony could not control his tears as he held her close and sobbed into her shoulder. Everyone stood up and clapped as a sign of respect for them holding up strong. The old woman silently sighed, said, "I can get to rest now when I..." She smiled as she makes her way down with Tony holding her right. The older woman's story so inspired many people at the gala that they were able to learn 1 or 2 lessons, Solemn music plays in the background, as most people are left with the thought of not making the same mistake made by the all very costly, like the older woman.
Mom is no longer with us. Catherine heard her father's quiet, confused voice. He stood perplexed, with the phone in his hand, looking at Catherine with a devastated look. Daddy, what's wrong? Please tell me. Catherine was shaking her father's hand, and the wild fear of tragedy shackled the whole body of the 15-year-old girl. Your mother died during childbirth, the father replied, stammering and barely holding back tears. Unbearable pain squeezed the girl's heart. Just yesterday, they were discussing the name of the future baby with Mom and Dad. Catherine had pressed her hands and cheek against her mother's stomach and listened to her sister move. And at night, her mother was taken by ambulance to the maternity hospital with contractions. Catherine hardly slept the rest of the night, waiting for the joyful news and imagining what her little sister would be like. Catherine didn't want to believe what she had heard. Shock, fear, indignation, and misunderstanding overwhelmed the girl. No. She felt as if everything inside her screamed. Acceptance began to come to her gradually. Grief gripped the family. Catherine and Dad hugged each other tightly and cried bitterly. A few days later, the baby was discharged from the hospital. Our Mirabelle, Catherine and her father spoke at the same time. Mirabelle was the name they all chose together on the eve of her mother's unexpected. Dad and Catherine brought little Mirabelle home and put her in a crib. The baby girl yawned and smiled sleepily, as if to show that everything will be fine. I am your Mirabelle. Catherine quickly matured because now she was taking the place of Mirabelle's mother. Catherine took full care of her sister. Little Mirabelle was happiness and joy for their family, and 5 years later, another tragedy came to their house. Dad was gone. Everything reminded Catherine of her former happiness, about her carefree childhood while her mother was alive, about how she and Dad raised Mirabelle together. But Catherine also could not forget all these tragic events that took place in her home and in her family. Mirabelle, you're going to school soon, Catherine said. What city would you like to study in? In a big, beautiful one, so that there was a river and a zoo, a skating rink, and even carousels, Mirabelle listed, bending her small fingers to count. Catherine hugged the girl and realized which city they would move to the place where happiness awaits them. The evening in the Smith family passed as usual. The head of the family, George, while waiting for dinner, aimlessly clicked the buttons on the TV remote and scolded without malice that there were more and more channels, and there was simply nothing to watch with pleasure. Elizabeth, along with her 12-year-old daughter Emma, cooked simple but very tasty dishes. Remember, daughter, when you mash the potatoes a little, then add milk, be sure to warm it up at the beginning. I know, Mom, you've already told me that 1,000 times. We also need to make sure that the foam does not get there. The girl charmingly wrinkled her nose, showing her attitude to this product. Do not worry, it is simply impossible to forget your science. George and Elizabeth's eldest son, Danny, 25, was also in the kitchen, having returned to his father's house after a short marriage of 3 months. He was slicing vegetables for a salad and thought how lucky he was with his family after all. How could he have imagined that his wife Lily, who claimed her faithful love, was so easy and simple to cheat on him? Parting with his wife greatly affected the guy's ego. His ex-wife reproached him for financial insolvency and lack of activity in the performance of marital duty. In general, the only joy in this difficult situation for Danny was the fact that his relatives did not get on his nerves, and they just didn't think about Lily, as if she didn't exist. Finally, Elizabeth, together with the children, cooked all the dishes, and the whole family traditionally sat down at the table. Between mashed potatoes and salad, the son announced to his parents that he would celebrate New Year's Eve, not at home, but with his former classmates. Harry got divorced too. Invited Andrew, Serge, and me, in general, our entire male company. Both housewarming and celebrating the new year at once. The news did not come as a surprise to parents. After all, they understood perfectly well that their son had grown up a long time ago. And besides, all the guys listed were well known to them. Andrew, Serge, and Harry met Danny at school, and surprisingly, time did not affect their friendship too much. They studied together at the same institute. And Harry and Andrew even worked together, and Elizabeth and George, without collusion, thought that an evening with old friends would help him unwind. "Say hello to all the guys for us," Danny's mom smiled tenderly, and in general invited them to sit with us sometime. "I haven't seen them for a long time. I missed them." "That's right, son. We'll get your console from the mezzanine, and we'll play like before." George got the idea of his wife. Emma tried to ask Danny to come to Harry's New Year's celebration, but received a firm and terse refusal from her brother. "Don't even think about it." The month remaining before the holiday flew by unnoticed. After congratulating his parents and sister on the upcoming, Danny got ready to visit a friend. In one hand, the guy had a bulky bag with groceries that he had bought on the table, and in the other, with Mom's salties. With all the supplies, he went to Harry. Because of the terrible ice, the sidewalk looked more like an ice rink. And Danny saw how, almost at the very entrance to a friend's house, a girl fell backwards, absurdly waving her hands with packages. Approaching her, he put down his bags and helped her get up and collect the rolled tangerines. "Oh, thank you very much," the stranger thanked him. "I don't understand how she managed to fall." The girl only looked straight into Danny's eyes for a few seconds, but he felt a warm and pleasant feeling in his heart. "Absolutely, not at all. It's so slippery here." And the guy hurried to pick up his bags, because his plans did not include a new novel at all. However, it turned out that both he and the stranger go to the same entrance. The girl, after a little hesitation, still entered the elevator with Danny. They almost said in unison, "I'm on the 4th." It was impossible not to smile. And the girl asked, "Are you going to Harry's by any chance?" "Yes, this is an old friend of mine." Dima really liked the gray eyes of the traveling companion and the cute dimples appearing on her cheeks and the minimal amount of cosmetics which his ex-wife was so fond of. "I have agreed to celebrate the New Year with him. Are you going to celebrate with him too?" "No, I live next door to him." A short conversation was interrupted with the opening of the elevator, and Danny decided to introduce himself for some reason. My name is Daniel." "Catherine," the girl answered, and opened the door with her key, letting her companion inside and showing that Harry lived here. "I wish you all the best, and Happy New Year." Danny knocked on the door of Harry's apartment and soon found himself among loyal friends. "Oh, what a surprise, Danny," Harry yelled with joy. "Didn't we lock the door here?" "No, your neighbor let me in, Catherine." "Good girl," the landlord immediately responded and added, "It's a pity that the girl is a little harsh." Andrew and Serge's friendly laughter erupted immediately. "Has she already turned you down? Did you not appreciate the unearthly beauty and cosmic charm?" In a noisy atmosphere of mutual jokes, friends saw off the old year, and the apartment continued to be filled with new guests. Harry explained to his friends that he had also invited his colleagues, who had nowhere to celebrate the holiday. As a result, the company turned out to be twice as large as planned. Instead of friendly gatherings of 4, 10 people gathered. The atmosphere, despite the fact that many were strangers, was cheerful. But there were problems with the furniture. A sofa and 2 chairs were available, but there were not enough seats at the table. And Harry turned to Danny. "Listen, friend, can you go to the neighbor and ask for chairs? And then we have some kind of buffet, turns out." Danny was surprised to realize that he was as worried as before a date when he knocked on Catherine's door. A pretty girl in a simple but surprisingly suitable dress opened the door for him without asking who came. And from behind, with enthusiastic cries, a girl of about 6 jumped out with huge bows fluttering over pigtails like exotic pink butterflies. "Mommy, Catherine!" "Hooray! Santa Claus has come!" "No, Mirabelle, it's not him," Catherine replied. "It's Daniel, a friend of our neighbor." Excuse me, can you help out with the chairs?" Danny was a little surprised that a noticeably young girl as Catherine seemed to him had such an adult daughter. "Harry, it seems, called the whole city to him," he said, trying to make an awkward joke. "I imagine," Catherine said. "Of course, I'll help you out. Mirabelle and I are celebrating together today. We're not waiting for anyone, so we'll sit on the couch." In the kitchen, there was an appetizing aroma of vanilla. He didn't even really want to go back to his friend's apartment. However, he took the offered chairs and with regret left the girl he liked so much. The fun was in full swing, but Danny was uneasy. He wanted to look into Catherine's eyes again. And even the girl's daughter didn't bother him at all. Therefore, he gladly volunteered to walk to the nearest open supermarket when it turned out that Andrew had forgotten to buy water and tonic, which the ladies from Harry's work who came to the party erratically asked for. "Come on, Andrew, I'll walk with you, otherwise it will be hard to bring." And there was ice on the street, Danny said, and he remembered how he met Catherine. Even in the store, he couldn't get rid of thoughts of Catherine and Mirabelle waiting for Santa Claus. He added a soft rabbit and a surprise toy, a Santa Claus hat and beard, a bar of high-quality chocolate, and a bottle of sparkling wine to the cart. Catching the surprised look on his friend's face, he explained, "I'll bring it to my neighbor for letting us use her chairs. Otherwise, I'm uncomfortable." Danny put the souvenirs for the charming Catherine and her daughter in separate gift bags, and sliding and cursing, the guys still got to their destination. Andrew brought the drinks into Harry's apartment, and Danny, wearing the attributes of a fairy tale character, knocked on the neighbor's door again. "Where is the girl who is waiting for me?" Slightly changing his voice, he asked Catherine and winked. The joyful Mirabelle looked attentively at the guest and hurriedly told him poems and in general everything that seemed important to her. She told him, "Next year I will go to school. I already got a backpack, and after the holidays, I'll go back to prep school. It's good that you came to us because Catherine doesn't believe in miracles at all for some reason." Handing the girl a well-deserved gift and waiting until she ran away to examine it, he handed a modest present to Catherine. "It's like compensation for chairs, inconveniences, and in general. We will obviously make noise and we will interfere with Mirabelle's rest." "Danny, how embarrassing. I don't even know how to thank you. Mirabelle wanted a holiday so much. As luck would have it, I didn't have much money now, and it's expensive to order Santa Claus during the new year as a fee to pay a world-class star. All you're doing today is helping me out." Tears sparkled in Catherine's eyes, and Danny hurried away. Because another minute, and he would have completely lost his head. The magical midnight in which it is customary to make a wish flashed by. Fireworks were booming, and Danny did not forget for a second about the neighbor who was so close, and, at the same time, so far away. He was trying to figure out why he was attracted to the girl. But then he gave up on everything and began to come to her after work. They took Mirabelle with them, and remembering their childhood, they went downhill, played snowballs, and just enjoyed life. The romance developed quickly, and on March 8th, Danny decided to introduce Catherine to his family. Elizabeth, having learned that her son would bring a girl to whom he wanted to propose soon, began to ask Danny, "Who is she? How old is she? Aren't you in too much of a hurry?" Danny told her everything he knew. He did not keep silent about the fact that Catherine is raising Mirabelle alone. Elizabeth tried to reason with her son that having children is not easy. She explained that he would have to build a relationship not only with the woman he loved, but also with the girl. And it's not easy, both morally and financially. Danny cut off all the lectures. "I do not care. Please don't be upset, but I'm not leaving Catherine or Mirabelle." When they first met Catherine, Danny's parents were wary about her. Elizabeth looked into the girl's face, could not drive away from herself the unpleasant thoughts that her son wanted to burden himself with raising someone else's child. Only the younger sister was childishly enthusiastic. Emma, having filled the plates with delicacies, handed Mirabelle lemonade and glasses, and immediately took the guest to her room. Danny tried to shield Catherine from Mom and Dad's questions, but when Elizabeth asked the girl to help her with the plates, George restrained him, who rushed into the kitchen by the hand, and he whispered softly, "Don't bother Mom, son." Elizabeth did not stand up for a long time, and immediately asked a direct question. "Catherine, I'm sorry, it's none of my business, but are you really only 21 years old, as my son said?" The girl, without ceasing to wipe the plates, nodded yes. "And anticipating your question, I will answer. I was not married, but do not rush to draw conclusions. Mirabelle is my sister. Mom died when Mirabelle was born. My father died a year ago from a heart attack, and we moved to this city. It was too difficult for me at home, a lot of unhappy memories, and nothing kept me there. I don't tell the Cavaliers right away that Mirabelle is actually not my daughter, but my sister, because it is simply impossible to separate us. She calls me Mom, too. Anyway, I've been raising her since she was a baby. I have no one closer to me, and I understand that I do not want to communicate with them at all, and we are clearly not in the way." Elizabeth, sobbing, hugged the girl and said, "I hope Danny passed this test of yours." Catherine smiled sheepishly because he had passed. "I just don't know how to tell him about it." Elizabeth and Catherine returned to the table with puffy eyes, but smiling. That evening she told Danny the truth. They celebrated the next New Year already acting as a young family, and Harry was a witness at the wedding because he was charming and a good neighbor.
Her name was Julie. She studied at an excellent, prestigious university. Julie and her friends often went to Cannes, Monaco, and Mallorca in Spain summer. They spent time at parties where Naomi Campbell, Irina Shayk, and other prominent personalities rested. The girls in her circle and she could afford the hotels where they party from morning to evening. They spent money without thinking about anything. They had many opportunities. They were all from wealthy families. Their parents did not spare cash for their beloved children. After such a fun vacation, they had to learn a lot. Famous and wealthy parents must have educated children. Frequent social events and news from magazines had to correspond to the statuses of their circle. At one of the college parties that the college kids were putting together, Julie met him, the different one. He didn't go to this university. He was called by someone who knew the faculty. Julie didn't expect anyone to impress her at first sight, and how could he be here? His unusual and closed nature caught her attention. Many guys tried to get to know her, but they were like everyone else in her circle. But that guy was very different from the other guys. There were no branded items on him. His bang covered his face slightly. He wasn't much of a talker, but there was something about him that immediately caught Julie's attention. He stood quietly aside and did not draw attention to himself. But not for Julie. For her, he became a center of interest. "John," he said quietly, and reached out to Julie. "Julie," she smiled back. The friends did not give much importance to their acquaintance, but a month later they were already walking hand in hand and could not take their eyes off each other. Their union was not in the spirit of all, but love was so burning that the young pair was regardless of others' opinions. They spent time together, as shown in the most romantic films. These were happy moments of their teenage life. They saw their future together. Together they dreamed a lot and had fun. Lovers enjoyed each other every day. John was from an ordinary family. His college, where he studied, had an urban planning direction. His parents worked at the factory and didn't really care about their son. He and Julie met on evenings after school. When they separated, they missed each other so much that they looked forward to an early meeting. Their love was visible from a distance. When they met, they spent time alone together. They were not bored at all together. They'd go out, talk about things, and always find something to do. Over time, their feelings began to diminish, and their different social statuses became more apparent in everyday life. As it happens, time passes and people's relationships stand still. John knew he had to act. He can't give Julie what she's so used to, that luxurious life. John dropped out of school and started working. He had less time to meet Julie. Julie didn't know what it was about because she was in a relationship. John believed that the financial component could hurt his self-esteem and he would lose his lover. John couldn't afford to live on someone else's dime. Without a good job, he couldn't live on the same level as Julie. He got an excellent job as an assistant architect. He worked a lot and stayed at work in the evenings. He had a clear goal, to achieve a good position, and he aspired to the same life as seen by his friends and Julie. She was irritated that John had less time to walk and spend with her. She tried to explain that she didn't need any of this. She was willing to live with her lover in any circumstances. John understood that it was all talk and nothing more. They couldn't have lived together for a long time in such different statuses. Living with Julie and not giving her what she was used to would sooner or later ruin their relationship. It was just a matter of time. After another year, which Julie finished perfectly, she got a call from her father. "Julie, congratulations on your successful graduation. I've arranged for you to go to further training in Paris." "But Dad, I don't want to go to Paris. My friends and John are here. I can finish my studies here," Julie said sadly. "This is not up for discussion. Either Paris or no entertainment and trips. You will live on your own with your John." Julie was still on the allowance her father threatened, or so she thought. Julie didn't want to upset her dad. She tried to finish her studies perfectly. Her father did so much for her. Her dad gave her a good education and fun and carefree childhood. In the evening, she called John to her room to talk. John did not understand why he had to go to Paris, so far and for a whole year. He didn't even have time to tell Julie about his promotion. His efforts were in vain, he thought. Julie had already decided, although it was difficult for her to tell John. She promised to come over for the holidays and said the year would pass unnoticed. But deep down, she knew she wasn't, and they would be put to the test. She believed then that life was easy and everything would be the same in a year. A month passed, the second after her departure to Paris. Calls between them became less frequent. Everyone had their own life. She studied and he worked. She lived for herself and her father. He lived and worked for her. Every time they talked, John would invite her over and ask her to come over at least for the weekend. But Julie never showed up, citing a bunch of cases, girlfriends' birthdays, and other excuses. She asked John to wait a little bit longer. "Soon, very soon we will meet again," she said on the phone. John understood that a year away was a test of their relationship. He trusted Julie, but it was a waste. At one of the parties, Julie had a few drinks and couldn't resist a burning brunette who was also clearly interested in her. She soon forgot about John. She felt no remorse. She thought the distance had already extinguished the feelings between them. But John did not think so. He tried and worked for Julie. A year passed. Julie came home. She couldn't hide her affair from John. She'd have a hard time living with it. She knew it. She didn't think she was cheating either. Julie's news crushed John. All his efforts were not in vain. His goal was more important than the girls, meeting with friends. He loved Julie very much and tried to please her. He became the head architect and was able to open his firm. This was a good lesson for John. It wasn't long ago. Julie was on a plane with her father. She had a seizure and cramps. She only remembered waking up in a room with her head bandaged. The attack was based on a developing tumor that caught essential parts of the brain. The plane was urgently grounded, and Julie was hospitalized in the hospital. She did not remember any of this. She was taken to the operating table unconscious. There was an operation for many hours without bringing her to her senses. Everyone was there except John. It's been a long time since John's met the girl who fell in love with him. Perhaps she did not love him if he were that student from the past who had nothing. Now he has become a prosperous architect. He had his own design office. Soon, he and his girlfriend had a great wedding and a beautiful girl. John and his family moved into a big country house that he bought for his family. Meanwhile, Julie was having a hard time. All the parties went to zero. Friends visit her, but she didn't need to. Her life was filled with treatment, hospital beds, and medication. She fought for her life every day. Because of her illness, her hair fell out. She had to get a wig. She became shy about her appearance. She lost a lot of weight. She could not help but look into the mirror. Now she could only dream of dating boys. It was hard for her to tell anyone about her illness and fate, especially John, how she lacked his support. But she couldn't even call. After all, she did such a bad thing to him then. She had a bad relationship with her father because Julie decided to freeze her egg. She made this decision herself and lay on the operating table. Her father was outraged and displeased with her father's rash actions. Julie was being treated with powerful drugs that killed her chances of staying pregnant. The egg was stored in a particular medical bank, the storage of which had to be paid every year. She hoped for a happy future. She wanted to marry and have a child someday. Sometimes she was called and asked to sell an egg to a same-sex family. Of course, she would not accept such offers. Julie hoped and dreamed of a child. She followed John's life through social media. Her life stopped at those student years before the accident, while John's life was evolving daily. His life was like the one they dreamed of together. They wanted a girl to call Mary. Everything remained in Julie's memories. As the years passed, Julie was left alone. Her friends also split up and started families. The occasional meeting with a friend was as uninteresting to Julie as possible. Julie never got over John. One day, John learned about Julie's situation from people he knew. He was told of a complex illness and an argument with her father, who had stopped helping her. Her dad got married for the third time, and Julie was all grown up, and she had to take care of herself. Her father had less contact with her because he had a new family. Julie bought a small apartment with Dad's money to live independently and earn her own money. It was the last gift from him. She did not have enough money to furnish the living room. Young people were interested in her, but the relationship did not last long. Julie, who was at university, had a lot of issues. She couldn't find anything in the boys that had ever hooked her in John. His humility, dedication, care, confidence, and dissimilarity were her captives of her. Such qualities were not present in any of them. No one could give her the feelings she felt with John, and she no longer felt like a young, beautiful, and promising girl. But one day, she got a doorbell. It was a furniture store messenger. She brought everything that could be arranged in the apartment. Tables, chairs, bed, headset. Everything was quality and expensive. Julie couldn't afford such furniture. She didn't know who it was from, but she could only guess. It's a gift from John, she thought. There was no note, not a single call from John. He did well despite Julie's actions in the past. Julie began to teach English to children and teenagers. It turned out that the study the father hoped for was unsuitable for his daughter's interests, and it was hard to get settled with such a specialty. Her salary was enough for food and household supplies. She could no longer afford the luxurious life she used to have. There was no time for such a life either. She had to pay the bills and gas and support herself. She had enough problems. There was no help from whom to expect. Every day, Julie would return to her apartment in the evenings, where no one was expecting her. Soon, Julie met one man and married him. They never had children. He loved her, and that was enough for her. It was a modest and quiet life without John. It was as if they had switched places with John. That wasn't, though. Julie had lost everything she had. Oh, if I had stayed then, she thought. But to return the time was impossible, and to regret what had been done was also wrong. She could not forget John. His life was happy and prosperous, unlike Julie's everyday life. If John hadn't met her, things might not have worked out so well for him. Was John happy? She could only guess. The stimulus and the goal always amaze the works, and the excellent result. Two fates, and so different. Someone rises, and someone has to fall. But the main thing is not to crash, but to get up and continue your way. In life, there are ups and downs. They only make you stronger and give you a chance to start over. Sometimes, decisions can turn your life around in ways you didn't expect. So, before you make a decision, evaluate the situation and think twice. You can offend someone close to you. You can break yourself or another's life. You don't have to jump to conclusions. Don't do what others want. Do what you want. Listen to yourself first. No one will live life for you. You make the rules for yourself.
Andrew shrinks into his hoodie as he walks into the cafeteria. It is noisy. Students have scattered around, some sitting, some walking around. and everybody is either in one group or the other. Paired off, 4 to 6 clique, cheerleaders, football jocks, debate group. Andrew stands at the entrance of the cafeteria and looks around. He had just transferred a week ago to Carmen High, and in that week he had been teased, made fun of, and called every name in the book about having diabetes, and humiliated in front of his whole class, all by a group of mean jocks, Chris, Nick, and Mason. He had only been in Carmen High for a week and hated every minute of it. He scanned the cafeteria once more, looking for, and at the same time, hoping not to see who he was looking for. When he was satisfied that they weren't there, he took a step in. He had barely taken 5 steps in when he felt a hand on his shoulder. Before he turned to see who it was, Andrew knew who it was and had started shaking in his pants. "Well, well, look what we have here. Drew the Shrew. So you finally grew the balls to eat in the cafeteria like a normal person." Chris, the leader of the group, and the one Andrew hated the most, said. He laughed. Nick and Mason joined in, as they took his arm on both sides and lifted him high, carrying him to the nearest table. Andrew didn't bother to struggle as they effortlessly moved him. He knew what was coming. He had lived through it once, and all he wanted was for it to be over. He closed his eyes and imagined he was at home. In his bedroom, it was his heaven, the only place he ever truly loved in the whole world. However, no matter how desperately he wished he could shut it all out, Chris's voice rang loud and clear as he announced to the cafeteria, "Hear ye, hear ye. Before you stand sugar overload, weak knees, diabetically perfect Drew the Shrew. Give it up for him, you all." A tear leaked through Andrew's tightly shut eyelids as all the students laughed. Andrew hears his dad call out to him as he runs blindly into his room. After the show Chris, Nick, and Mason had put on in the cafeteria played out, the principal, Mrs. Gooding, came into the restaurant and dispelled it. She gave Chris, Nick, and Mason a week of detention, and she had turned to Andrew and asked him if he thought he could still handle the rest of the day. When he didn't reply, she saw how he was shaking. She had called Andrew's dad to come and pick him up. It wasn't until later Andrew learned that a student had gone to report to the principal. Andrew silently said a prayer for that student. He slammed the door to his room, dumped his backpack on the floor, and fell face down on his bed, letting all the tears he had held back loose. He hears his dad knocking on the door, asking if he is okay and if he wants to talk. Andrew ignores everything and just sobs into his pillow. After a while, when he realizes Andrew is not going to answer, his dad finally leaves. 5 hours later, at 6:18 p.m., Andrew finally gets up from his bed. He had dozed off somewhere between crying his eyes out and hating his life. He sits in his bed and looks around. The sun spilled into his room through a crack in the window, illuminating the room. He picks up his glasses from his nightstand, puts them on, and walks outside. He sees his dad sitting at the dining table, his reading glasses perched on his face as he peered at his laptop. The light from the sun that shone through the dining area windows washed over his head, lightening the shades of his hair. Andrew stands at the entrance and stares at his dad for a few seconds. For as long as Andrew could remember, he had always wished he could be more like his father, have a quarter of his strength, a pinch of his courage, and not be this weakling. On the good days, he hated the world for being so cruel to him. He hated the people in the world for being so mean to him. And sometimes he even hated the universe for casting the type of cruel fate he had on him. And on the evil days, he hated himself. His dad must have heard his thoughts somehow because he looked over at him. He slowly removed his glasses, concern evident in his voice. He asked, "Hey, how are you feeling?" Andrew hesitates and then walks into the dining area. He sits in the chair adjacent to his dad's and pours water from the pitcher on the table into a glass cup. He feels his father's eyes on him as he drinks. His dad waits for him to finish drinking, and then he asks, "Okay now?" Even though he wasn't anything but, Andrew nods. His dad also nods and clears his throat. "You want to talk about it?" he asks. Maybe it was the fatigue from the day he had, or perhaps he was just tired of keeping it all in. But the automatic response he always had prepared didn't suffice at the moment, and he found himself laying it all out to his dad. He broke down and told him everything, from the humiliation to the embarrassments, the fundamental injustice, and everything he had been going through since he started going to Carmen. His dad listened while he talked, not once interrupting him, and when Andrew was finally done, his throat had gone scratchy, and the back of his eyes were itchy. The tears were threatening, but he did his best to keep them in check. He was not going to cry in front of his dad. He knew it was all right if he did, but he needed not to. When it looked like Andrew was finally done, his father said, "I want to tell you a story about a crow and an eagle. There was this eagle who got picked on by a crow, kind of like how you are getting picked on by these boys. The crow would fly above this eagle and peck on the eagle's eyes, kind of like how these boys act, air above you and pick on your sickness. And the crow, after doing this, would fly far away, where the eagle cannot reach her, kind of like how these boys walk around feeling full of themselves after picking on you. But then the eagle does something. She flies straight and high, higher than the crow can reach, and because of this, the crow falls to her death, as she does not have the required oxygen to fly that high." At this point, his dad pauses and looks into Andrew's eyes. He holds eye contact with him as he adds, "And that, son, is what you must do. The eagle is what you must become. You must soar high, higher than those boys. You must fly, son, higher than those boys. So high they don't have enough oxygen to meet up. You must be the eagle, son." 20 years later, the rain pours down heavily. It had not let down since morning. It was 2 p.m. A black Chevy pulls up in front of a modern-style house. A man dressed in a black suit comes out of the car, runs towards the other side of the car, holds an umbrella, and opens the door. A man of the same age comes out of the vehicle, and the two both walk into the house. When they get to the entrance, the man holding the umbrella rushes forward to open the door for the other man. The house's interior is Andrew's childhood home. And as the two men enter the house, Andrew's dad comes into view. Andrew is the man who the other man, Nick, was holding an umbrella over. Behind them, another man, about the same age as Andrew and Nick, Mason, rushes in from the pouring rain. He is the chauffeur who drove Andrew over. He was soaking wet as he stood in the entrance, not quite in the house, nor outside in the rain either. Andrew stands in front of his father, and they stare at each other. Unsaid things and shared memories whisper between them. The rain continues to pour down on the roof in heavy droplets. The sounds of their platters, the only sound that can be heard above the heads as Andrew and his father stand facing each other. Andrew breaks the silence. "Hello, Dad," he says, his voice thick with emotion. His dad's eyes shone with unshed tears. Just then, another man rushes in the rain, soaking wet. He stands on the threshold and tries to shake the water away from his hair, even as he tries to protect the papers he had in his right hand from falling. He rushes into the living room where Andrew and his dad are. He awkwardly fumbles to the right as he stands beside Andrew. Andrew barely glances at him as he walks towards his father. They hug tightly, then they let go and sit on opposite chairs, facing each other. "So how are you?" "Work. I feel it's been forever since I saw you last," Andrew's dad said. Andrew chuckles and replies, "Yeah, I've missed you too, Dad. Work has been hectic and starting your own company is difficult, but I've been doing okay. And since it seems to be getting on its feet, I needed to see you. And so here I am." His dad nods his head slowly, smiling. "Well, I'm glad you did. It sometimes gets lonely around here, you know, and having my only son come visit me, well, this is easily the highlight of my week," Dad said. They both laugh. "And your diabetes? Do you have any episodes?" Andrew's dad asked, throwing one question after another, concern palpable in his voice. Andrew laughed softly and replied, "Relax, Dad. One at a time, please. Yes, I am taking my medication regularly. I am doing good on that front." Andrew paused, and his expression got serious as he continues. "I know what we went through with my diabetes and wouldn't be so irresponsible to let that happen again. I have become even more careful, I promise. My medicine is here with me. It's with one of them. He tips his head towards the entrance where Chris stands. His dad's eyes follow Andrew's gestures. Yes, I was going to ask, who are they? Should I offer them some tea? Andrew smiled and replied, remember that story you told me about the crow and the eagle? How the crow would always pick on the eagle and fly away. Well, Andrew paused for dramatic effect as he points to Chris, Nick, and Mason. These are the crows, Dad. Meet Chris, Nick, and Mason. The crows who flew away that day. The bullies who made my life a living hell in Carmen High. He stopped and looked straight into his dad's eyes, his voice firm with no trace of the tired little Andrew, who was constantly getting bullied. His eyes clear as he maintained eye contact. I became the eagle, Dad. I became the eagle, and I soared high, higher than the crows could ever fly, and they fell. He continued, that day, Dad, when I came home and you told me the story about the crow and the eagle, you gave me the courage to move on when I wanted to give up. And I am most glad I took your advice, because I wouldn't be here if I didn't. Thank you, Dad.